Welcome to the Headless Professor video series. This one is about Freud's psychoanalytic theory and how it interprets religious phenomena. Freud's system of psychoanalysis attempted to reduce human behavior to sexual and aggressive drives. Now, no form of human activity or thought was immune to analysis by Freud's system. He tried to explain everything, from fairy tales to jokes to slips of the tongue. Freud viewed the human mind as three different levels: conscious, things that we are aware of; pre-conscious, things that we can become aware of and voluntarily bring into consciousness; and unconscious, things that are beyond our normal waking consciousness, and we cannot voluntarily bring these thoughts into mind. So the thoughts that are unconscious would be memories and wishes that have been repressed. The reason that these memories have been repressed is because they deal with our aggressive drive, thanatos, or the sexual drive, libido. Now, these unconscious forces existed in a structural region of the mind called the id. Now, the way to remember id, look at the spelling, ID, and think of it as if it stood for internal drives. This region of the mind is the very first to exist in the young child. Freud viewed the young child just as a seat of these uncontrolled internal drives. What happens over the next few years of life, ages 1 to 3, is the growth of a conscience, something that makes the child feel guilt and provides a kind of internal control. That conscience Freud called the superego, and what it really was an internalization of the parents telling the child, no, no. Notice that the superego is over here on the left side of the diagram, close to the aggressive drive of thanatos. That's because Freud thought that the superego got its energy from this aggressive drive. It internalized the force of aggression and actually turned aggression against itself, against the id, in order to control the drives of the id. The last part of the mind to develop in Freud's model was the ego, the sense of individual self, the part of the self that actually had the responsibility of dealing with the external world. Ideally, Freud thought that the healthy individual would develop a strong and stable ego, capable of balancing the competing demands of the id for immediate expression of sexual and aggressive drives, and the superego that sought to repress these sexual and aggressive drives. Now, the ego also wants to control the sexual and aggressive drives, but will do so in a more calm manner and one that is less neurotic. Now, when Freud viewed human societies and the development of civilization, he thought that it paralleled the development of the individual. So think of ancient man, so-called primitive man, as being driven by his id, according to Freud. And then what permitted tribal culture to exist was the development of a superego, various kinds of taboos that would prevent sexual and aggressive tendencies from working out. It is in this context that Freud viewed religion. Freud thought that religion was merely a form of the internalized superego designed to control the aggression and sex of the id. Freud's hope for the future was that just as the ego replaced the task of the superego in the developing individual, so in developing civilization, we would have religion be replaced by science. And of course, when Freud talked about science, he thought his own system of psychoanalysis was scientific. In other words, in the future, we're not going to need religion to help us control our sexual and aggressive drives. We'll be psychoanalyzed and be healthy like that. Therefore, if we look at Freud's view of the future, he thought that mankind would outgrow the need for religion. Religion was not much better than an infantile neurosis, a very primitive and only partially effective way of controlling sex and aggression, a technique that mankind would eventually outgrow.